A pregnant woman was tied to a cross. The king ordered her to be burned alive. As the flames roared, everyone appeared to accept it as just. Suddenly, cries echoed through the sky as the woman gave birth amidst the flames. Onlookers were in disbelief at the sight of the newborn in the fire. Suddenly, a werewolf named Herman appeared behind the king. He bypassed the guards, not to attack the king, but to jump from a windowsill into the flames. He rescued the newborn and fled through the crowd on a warhorse. Herman, a Makai Knight with the title of Ancestral Wolf, was too late to save his wife, the woman being executed, but managed to rescue his son. The execution was due to the king falling severely ill, leading his trusted advisor Mendoza to convince him that his illness was caused by a witch's curse. Believing this, the king initiated a nationwide witch hunt. This not only involved capturing witches, but also allowed civilians to carry out vigilante justice against them. Many women, including Herman's wife, were killed due to this decree, which also enabled criminals to commit crimes under the guise of witch hunting. The empire itself began to falter under the strain of the witch hunts. In the blink of an eye, the witch hunt had been ongoing for 17 years. The infant born amidst the flames, Leon, had grown into a handsome young man. Through the power of his bloodline and a gift from his mother, he became a powerful Makai Knight Garo, just like his father. One day, a group of imperial pursuers found Leon. It turned out that Mendoza, aiming to eliminate any future threats, had been sending his minions to hunt down Herman and his son for 17 years. The enemies set fire to kill Leon, but Leon, now the Golden Knight, was not only unafraid of the flames, but also easily subdued the leader of the enemies. Unexpectedly, the enemy was not human, but a man-eating horror monster. However, defeating horrors was exactly the job of a Makai Knight. Leon knocked the monstrous creature to the ground, first scaring off the regular soldiers, then both prepared for the final blow. Leon sharpened his sword and charged, slashing the horror repeatedly until it was no longer recognizable, ultimately destroying it. Herman arrived belatedly. Faced with Leon's curiosity about the horror, Herman finally decided to reveal the reasons behind Mendoza's witch hunt. He is a Makai Knight with the title of Ancestral Wolf, but he couldn't protect his own wife and could only watch as she was burned to death. After her death, his personality changed drastically. He spent his days indulging in pleasure quarters. When his son came to take him home, he instead asked his son for money. Of course, all he gave him was a large stone. Once his son left, the man resumed his indulgent lifestyle. However, the woman with him tonight was actually a man-eating horror monster who liked to lure lustful men to devour them as a midnight snack. But Herman had already noticed. As an experienced debaucher, his principle was to enjoy first and deny debts later. The woman, thinking she had seduced him enough, was ready to devour him in one gulp. Having had his fill, Herman promptly killed the horror with a single strike, proving his status as one of the strongest Makai Knights. Upon returning home, he saw the aftermath of the great battle his son had just fought. The Empire had once again found their hiding place, which was actually arranged by Herman. He wanted to see if his son could handle things on his own. He was not disappointed. He was now ready to return with his son to the place where his wife had met her tragic fate. After traveling for 81 days, they arrived near the city. Herman first sold the horses, claiming he didn't want to attract too much attention and needed to raise some living expenses. However, he quickly found a beautiful tour guide. In just a moment of distraction, Herman's face was covered with lipstick marks, and he sent his son Leon to explore alone. Leon, grumbling, went alone to the site of his mother's death. As he was lost in thought, a strange man nearby thought Leon was interested in witch executions, and told him that recently many women had been taken into a nearby tower, possibly a new site for executing witches. At that time, a woman named Emma was inside the tower, captured by Mendoza's minions for using healing spells. She was told that anyone confirmed to be a witch would face execution. The priest told her she had one night to decide whether to stubbornly deny or confess under torture. Seeing Emma's calm demeanor, he realized that the situation was not straightforward. After leaving, the priest himself transformed into a horror monster. This man, resembling a psychopath, was actually a horror monster. He intended to use the tools on the wall to find the witch's weakest spot and then devour her. The girl remained calm. After the man fully expressed his thoughts, she changed her posture and gently shook the bells on her thigh, which seemed to control him. This was Emma's method to test if the man was a horror. Once exposed, the man revealed his true horror form. At that moment, Herman burst in, and Leon attacked the horror with his sword. They broke through the wall together. Herman tried to show his chivalry to Emma, who found him bothersome and chased after the horror using a teleportation spell. The horror, knowing it was outnumbered, transformed again, ready to fight both. Emma and Leon shared a smile in midair. Sensing Leon was weaker, the horror targeted him. Leon was thrown down to the bridge, landing right at his mother's execution site. Memories of his mother flooded back, and he transformed into the Golden Knight, though visibly not in his best state. The horror took advantage of this, launching a sneak attack. Leon retaliated with a fiery blast along the chains, repelling the foe but also injuring his ally. Seeing the dire situation, Herman transformed into the shadow-cutting knight to control his frenzied son. As the horror tried to flee, Emma pursued it with her whip, striking it into oblivion. No wonder she had been so composed when facing the horror initially. Herman stabbed Leon's transformation device with his sword, helping Leon regain his senses and deactivating the Golden Knight armor. Leon's inheritance from his mother became uncontrollable due to a witch hunt 17 years ago, which cracked the motto ring that controlled his powers. Without the motto ring, Leon often lost control when transforming into the Golden Knight. At that time, Herman sought the help of Gale, an alchemist, to repair the ring. 17 years later, Gale notified Herman to retrieve the ring from his lab. However, just before the final ceremony, Gale's apprentice, seduced by evil, tried to take the motto ring for himself. He turned against his revered master, intending to flee with the ring, but unexpectedly encountered Emma. He was originally a knight of justice, but became a slave to demons due to his obsession with power that wasn't his. He not only killed his master, but also stole the Golden Knight's exclusive motto ring. However, he didn't realize that without the bloodline power, he couldn't unleash the motto ring's potential, rendering his actions futile. He then tried to pin the murder of his master on Emma, who happened to pass by, but Herman ruthlessly exposed his deceit. Knowing he couldn't justify his actions, he used demonic power to transform into a horror monster. Seeing the transformation, Leon wanted to test the strength gap between himself and the powerful horror. Quickly morphing into the Golden Knight, he charged at the horror, who countered with long-range attacks to block Leon's approach. Agilely, Leon charged directly at the horror, who then shifted forms for close combat and used phantom fire to trap him in memories, nearly causing him to lose control. Fortunately, at the crucial moment, Emma intervened, using her silk threads to shatter the horror's vital shield. Then, Leon charged at the horror, leaped behind it, and stabbed it with his sword, reclaiming his own motto ring, Zaruba. Zaruba pulled Leon into another space to form a pact. Zaruba would grant Leon power, and in return, Leon was to sacrifice his life on the night of a full moon. Once made, the pact could not be revoked. Leon finally gained the full power of the Golden Knight and completely destroyed the horror in front of him. Emma then took care of everything related to the alchemist Gale. Curious, Leon wondered how Emma could find them in such a hidden place. Emma did not explain, but told him to learn to observe. Herman simply smiled and remained silent. After Emma coolly left, Leon was still confused. Herman hadn't realized his son was so naive, not noticing that he had been tracked. It seemed he still had much to learn. He was to be the next king, but is now a fugitive of the Empire. This happened because, at his coming-of-age ceremony at 20, his mother gifted him the amulet she had worn since childhood. Unknown to them, it was actually a badge symbolizing the lineage of the Golden Knight, which was recognized by a sharp-eyed maid. She reported this to Minister Mendoza, who harbored hatred for the Golden Knights and could not accept someone with the Golden Knight lineage becoming king. He planned to disqualify Alfonso from kingship. The next day, Mendoza brought his loyalists and stormed the royal palace, where he found Alfonso's mother administering medicine to the king. He halted the queen's actions, accusing her of poisoning the king's medicine. While the queen tried to explain, Mendoza had her forcibly taken away. By the time Alfonso learned about this, the queen was already locked in a prison cart en route to trial. Alfonso rode after the cart to seek the truth, but the queen urged him to flee. Seeing the pursuers behind him and wanting to find a way to rescue his mother, he had no choice but to escape the capital. Clearly, Mendoza was not planning to let him go and sent his men to capture Alfonso. Unaware, Alfonso was discovered by the enemy, but unexpectedly, these soldiers turned out to be demons. With his knightly lineage unawakened, he was no match for the demons and was nearly killed. At that moment, a sword-wielding man saved him, swiftly defeating the demons. This man was the legendary hero of the Empire, Stronghold Knight. He then led Alfonso to a dilapidated knight's chapel. The man introduced himself as Raphael and began explaining how the Makai Knights and mages have protected the country from the horrors. However, as the number of horrors decreased, people forgot their contributions and even persecuted them based on rumors. The Makai Knights and mages could not retaliate against ordinary people, and most of the country's defenders were killed under strange lies, all orchestrated by Mendoza. Raphael then shared the story of Leon's mother, revealing she was actually Alfonso's aunt. The family of the Golden Knights had a rule to prevent their lineage from vanishing. Each generation would have at least 2 children, one raised as a knight or mage, and the other raised as an ordinary person by others. If nothing happened to the main family's child, the other's identity would remain hidden. Thus, although they were sisters, they might never know each other. The only ones aware of this secret were Stronghold Knight and Alfonso and Leon's grandfather. Now aware of the power within him, Alfonso felt somewhat inflated, but Raphael quickly made him see reality. Currently, he lacked the strength to fight monsters and could not even wield his designated sword. Alfonso would need to undergo training to unleash the true power of the Golden Knight. A pregnant woman was about to be burned alive, but she gave birth to her son just before dying, entrusting him with her hopes for revenge. At that moment, her husband arrived too late to save her. He could only flee with their son. 17 years have passed, and the baby has grown into the Golden Knight Garo. Leon, following his father, travels around fighting the malevolent horrors. One day, they arrived at a remote village, shocked by its eerie atmosphere before even entering. A beautiful woman by the well relaxed Herman, but he was nearly terrified when he turned around. The village chief soon approached. Seeing strangers, the villagers seemed tense. Herman mentioned he had heard of disappearances in the area and wanted to investigate. The chief immediately denied this, claiming theirs was a peaceful village, and insisted Herman leave that day. It was clear the village was hiding something. On their way out in the evening, they saw a blonde boy, Iros, being bullied by other children. Herman intervened, and the older children, recognizing outsiders, urged them to leave, calling it a cursed village. For Iros' safety, Herman decided to take him home. Upon meeting the boy's mother, Herman was instantly charmed, especially learning her husband had died. He inquired about the village's happenings, but the woman did not answer, seducing Herman with sweet nothings. She then invited Herman and his son to stay at her house. At dinner time, Herman brought up the disappearances in the village again, but before any conclusion could be reached, the door was kicked open. Parents demanding their children burst in, revealing that the village's children had disappeared that evening. Someone had seen Iros leading them away, leading to suspicion that the woman was seeking revenge. The village chief ordered the woman to be taken away, and in the chaos, Iros escaped. Herman, suspecting something was off with Iros, decided to stay and see how things unfolded. During the woman's interrogation by the chief, a fire suddenly broke out at the chief's house, causing a commotion as everyone rushed to put it out. Herman took this opportunity to sneak in and attempt to rescue the woman. Just as they were about to escape, they found the chief blocking the door, but he did not hinder them and instead told Herman to take the woman away. After they left, the chief instructed the villagers to prepare for a ritual. Meanwhile, Leon followed the fleeing Iros to a dilapidated hut deep in the forest, filled with various puppets, resembling a bizarre ritual site. As Leon was still processing the scene, Iros suddenly appeared behind him. Leon told Iros to come back with him, saying his mother had been rescued. But upon returning home, Herman tested Iros, suspecting him to be a horror monster. After the tests showed no reaction, Herman was puzzled about where he might have gone wrong. Leon then realized that horrors don't necessarily have to look human and recalled the puppet Iros was always holding. Sure enough, when they opened the door, Iros was gone. As Leon rushed after him, Herman and the woman were surrounded by villagers. It turned out the so-called ritual was actually a guise for bandits to kill villagers who opposed their control. When Leon found Iros and demanded the puppet transformed into a horror monster and attacked Leon. Fortunately, this horror wasn't very strong, and Leon managed to drive it off with a few moves. Although Leon wanted to pursue it, Iros stopped him. It turned out that Iros' father had been killed by the villagers, and he wanted to use the puppet for revenge. Meanwhile, Herman learned the same from the woman. As the villagers were about to storm in, the horror suddenly appeared and began to eat the villagers, who were disguised as bandits. Just as the chief, the mastermind, was about to be eaten, Leon arrived. This time, he did not hold back and quickly killed the horror. Even knowing that these people were villains, as the Golden Knight, he could not allow the horror to continue devouring humans. Although he wished he could punish the other villains himself, as Makai Knights, their code prevents them from harming humans. Finally returning to the city where his mother had passed away, Leon felt a mix of emotions. Herman immediately declared his intention to gather intelligence and also to visit an old lover. Without looking back, Leon grabbed his wallet and left. At a market, Leon was spellbound by a girl. The aunt selling vegetables nearby thought Leon was interested in the girl and insisted on helping him speak for marriage. Fortunately, Emma appeared and rescued Leon from the situation. Seeing Leon so shy about expressing love, Emma realized he was just a young man and advised him to learn to hide his emotions before leaving. Meanwhile, Herman was drinking with a swordsmith who had just learned of his son's death in the king's army. The swordsmith should have been grieving, but being around his son's sword, which was possessed by a demon, he was controlled by the evil spirit and lost his sense of sorrow. Herman, drinking with him, noticed nothing unusual until the swordsmith complained of a headache and left. Rather than going home, the swordsmith asked two patrolling soldiers about his son's whereabouts. Unsatisfied with their response, he suddenly transformed into a horror and attacked them. The next day, when Herman went to see the swordsmith again, he unexpectedly ran into Leon. It turned out that the swordsmith's apprentice had become friends with Leon by chance. The father and son visited the swordsmith's home, where the swordsmith again complained of a headache. Leon and Herman, still upset from a morning argument, quarreled. Herman said it would be better not to have a son like Leon, which unintentionally hurt the swordsmith, who then used his headache as an excuse to send them away. On their way out, the swordsmith's apprentice caught up with them and shared that his master had changed drastically after his brother was killed, as if he had become a different person. Learning this, Leon and Herman decided to help the apprentice investigate what had happened to the swordsmith. In the swordsmith's room where he stored his swords, Herman detected traces of demonic presence in the swords. By then, the master had already turned into a demon and was desperately seeking information about his son's whereabouts. When they found the demon-transformed swordsmith, Herman decided to take action personally. Out of respect for his drinking buddy, he transformed into the shadow-cutting knight and lured the demon to a less crowded area to attack. Herman proved more adept at handling horrors than Leon, easily dispatching the demon with his combination technique and saying farewell to the friend he had only known for a day. Herman then explained that people turn into horrors due to inner fractures, which give demons an opportunity to take hold. At that moment, Emma arrived and informed Herman that there seemed to be corruption in the selection of kingdom knights. Those chosen were being controlled by demons. One could only imagine what would happen if all the soldiers were transformed into demons and what the state of the nation would become. This was Leon's first major defeat since becoming a Makai Knight. Betrayed by the innkeeper, Leon was surrounded by the Empire's minions. He barely escaped and managed to defeat the obstructing horrors. Suddenly, a man confronted Leon. To Leon's surprise, this man was also a Makai Knight. But his evil aura sent shivers down Leon's spine. Dodging the man's attack, Leon transformed into the Golden Knight and charged at his foe, slashing in mid-air. However, the enemy mocked Leon's weak attack. Knowing he was outmatched, Leon tried to retreat, but was quickly pursued and knocked to the ground. An invisible shockwave then expelled Leon and broke his knightly form. Just as the enemy was about to finish Leon, Emma used a rope to pull him away. Nevertheless, the enemy wasn't willing to let them escape easily, cutting Emma's rope with a long-range attack and then targeting her. Injured, Emma had no choice but to flee. When Leon awoke, he found himself tied up in a clinic. A person resembling a doctor said he needed to drain bad blood from Leon. Suddenly, a group burst in, defeated the so-called doctor, and claimed they were werewolves. Mysteriously, Leon also transformed into a werewolf, his body changing and a violent temper driving him to kill everyone around him. Disbelieving what he had done, Leon fled into the darkness. When he woke up again, Leon found himself in a strange house where everyone called him Louis. He also discovered that he had amnesia. An old man told him that he had been attacked by werewolves, which caused his memory loss. Before Leon could ask more questions, everyone's attention was drawn outside by a clown. Following the crowd, Leon ended up at a church where a man patted some children on the head, selecting them for a journey to Rugaraza. The other children had to return home disappointed. A nun then stopped a girl, who excitedly told her that Louis had returned. The nun's shocked expression indicated that the situation was complicated. By evening, Leon encountered the nun again and stopped her to inquire about his identity. Seeing his amnesia, the nun told Leon that she had saved his life and that he had fled to this place from abroad. Unable to argue due to his memory loss, Leon returned home to find that the old man and his sister were not there. Driven by intense curiosity, he opened a locked cabinet and found only a sword inside. When he gripped the sword, all his lost memories returned. He realized the old man had deceived him. The man was a Mado Ring sorcerer who had used a potion to erase Leon's memory. When confronted, the old man explained that it was all for the girl. Her parents had been killed 5 years earlier, falsely accused of being werewolves. Her only remaining relative, her brother Louis, had run away from home. To make the girl believe Louis would come to fetch her, the old man had Leon temporarily assume Louis's identity. On the other hand, his sister had already met the real Louis. It turned out that Louis had been disguising himself as a clown to stay close to his sister. He then took her to a monastery. Originally, when he was sent to Rugaraza after being selected, it was not for a good cause, but because he was trafficked by human traffickers. Louis suffered various torments on the traffickers' ship, and eventually, the evil thoughts turned him into a horror's monster. He didn't want other children to be deceived like him. His return wasn't only to seek revenge on the monastery, but also to rescue the trafficked children. Thus, he disguised himself as a clown, a figure beloved by children, to lead them away. Just as he was about to leave, Leon caught up with him. Although he could understand Louis, once he turned into a horror's monster, Leon could not just stand by. Eventually, Leon transformed into the Golden Knight and quickly subdued the horror's monster with just a few strikes. Even though he had eliminated the demon, Leon was not happy. The situation with Louis made him start to question whether he was truly upholding justice when defeating horror's monsters. The strongest Makai Knights fell victim to a honey trap. The enemies were not horror's monsters, preventing Herman from attacking them. He was lured into a warehouse by a woman and completely fell for her after just one kiss. Unable to resist the temptation, his true nature was fully exposed. At that moment, the woman's accomplice kicked in the door and his wallet was stolen. They didn't plan to let Herman go, forcing him to flee naked. Because he was unclothed, patrolling soldiers mistook him for a pervert. Fortunately, Emma appeared just in time and helped him evade the pursuing soldiers. Emma was actually there to inform him that Leon had been attacked by the Dark Knight. Hearing the name Bernardo, Herman's expression changed, hinting at a history between them. Emma urged Herman to check on Leon, but Herman refused, stating that if Leon couldn't recognize his own issues, he didn't deserve to be the Golden Knight. After saying this, he left and went to confront a priest at the temple, asking if Bernardo had truly fallen. The confirmation brought back memories. Herman and Bernardo had once been close as brothers, and both had loved Leon's mother. Herman won her heart, and Bernardo, rather than being jealous, blessed their union. One day, due to a witch hunt, they were chased by Imperial soldiers. Herman and Anna, who was pregnant, were knocked off their horse. Bernardo insisted Herman escape with Anna while he stayed behind to block the soldiers. Due to the rule that Makai Knights cannot attack ordinary people, Bernardo lured the soldiers to capture him instead. Surrounded, not wanting to die, his only choice was to fight back. This led to his transformation into the Dark Knight. At night, Herman returned to the warehouse where he had been during the day, hoping to retrieve his clothes and weapons. However, he was ambushed by someone. Upon closer look, it was the same woman from earlier. She hugged him again. Herman didn't understand what she wanted, but then noticed she was covered in bruises. She told him that after he left in the morning, one of her companions had suddenly turned into a monster. At that moment, the individual appeared at the warehouse door and transformed into a horrors monster. Now Herman had a reason to fight it. He easily defeated the monster and used the opportunity to scare the woman, warning her that she too could turn into such a creature if she wasn't exorcised. After a sleepless night, Herman happily left the warehouse at dawn, but again forgot to put on his clothes. He wanted to check on his son. Leon walked past him, but Herman offered no advice. Like most parents, he silently watched his child stumble and grow. Indeed, everyone's life requires a phase of growing up alone. From a prince to a prisoner, his mother thrown into the dungeon, and his father's fate uncertain, the whole nation was nearly under Mendoza's control. Alfonso wanted to defeat Mendoza, and dealing with the horrors monsters was an inevitable part of this. He needed the power to fight them, so he sought Raphael to teach him the art of slaying these demons. Raphael decided to first show him the state of the nation, taking him to the domain of Count Romer, their first stop. In Alfonso's memory, this place was lush and fertile. However, upon arrival, it seemed more like a hell on earth. He wanted to understand what had happened here, but the villagers fled at the sight of him, mistaking him for the Count's minion. Raphael explained that everything was due to Count Romer turning into a horrors monster. He then split the gates of the Count's mansion with a single strike and motioned for Alfonso to carefully follow him into the depths of the house. A shadow followed them stealthily, attempting to ambush Alfonso, but Raphael intercepted it. In front of them stood a figure resembling a soldier. Raphael pulled out a detector, and as the soldier's eyes slowly turned red, confirming he was a horrors monster, the soldier dropped his disguise. A battle was imminent. Raphael, with his superior swordsmanship, easily overpowered the horrors monster. Seeing that he was losing, the monster attacked Alfonso, hoping to distract Raphael. Alfonso was locked in a secret chamber where he saw musicians playing, a frightened mother and child, and a horrors monster slowly approaching them. To protect them, Alfonso attacked the horrors monster but caused hardly any damage. He had no choice but to flee with the mother and child while the musician was swallowed by the monster. Alfonso could not tolerate the monster, but his attacks barely affected it. At that moment, Raphael arrived, transformed into the Stronghold Knight, and faced the multi-legged monster. He drew a magical circle on the ground and executed a fiery slash, incinerating the monster in flames. This incident made Alfonso realize his own insignificance once again, and he resolved to undergo intensive training with Raphael. They went to a natural training ground where Alfonso began the most rigorous training, and Raphael did not hold back. Over time, Alfonso's abilities improved significantly, even managing to exchange a few blows with Raphael. However, Raphael felt the progress was too slow as he had limited time left. One day, he went to the temple to ask the priest where the most ferocious horrors monsters were located. He wanted to put Alfonso through a life and death trial to quickly become a Makai Knight. The priest, without much discussion, directed him to fight the Chirame of Obihiko, where the most vicious horrors monsters resided, and where no knight had returned alive. Satisfied with the information, Raphael left the temple, and Leon arrived shortly after. It was his first time at the temple, and like Raphael, he was looking for a place to hone his combat skills. Hearing his request, the priest sent Leon to Obihiko as well. Back in reality, Raphael told Alfonso that he had chosen a final trial for him. If he could pass it, he would become a Makai Knight. Although unsure of the trial's difficulty, Alfonso was confident he could complete it. After bidding farewell to his master, Alfonso arrived at Obihiko, but was immediately hassled by a swindler. Encountering a rogue for the first time left the downcast prince helpless. until Leon, who was passing by, helped him. This was how the two met and became friends. Although aware of each other's identities, they tacitly did not disclose their purpose for being there. Late at night, Leon sneaked out to search for the monster and unexpectedly ran into Alfonso, who was also on a hunt for the monster. They nearly came to blows and questioned each other's reasons for being out so late, each telling a lie. However, they ended up moving in the same direction and realized that they were both there to eliminate the monster. Suddenly, a strange wind blew through the valley. They ran towards the source of the wind and indeed encountered the monster Chirame. Chirame immediately attacked them, but with just one strike, both of them were overwhelmed. Leon told Alfonso to retreat because ordinary blades could not harm horror's monsters. However, Alfonso stated that this was his trial, and even if it killed him, he would not retreat. Seeing Alfonso's resolve, Leon decided to support him. He rushed forward and dealt with Chirame's two skeletal guards. Seizing the opportunity, Alfonso jumped onto the monster's head and shattered the stone tablet on its body. He thought this would destroy the monster, but instead, it unleashed the monster's seal. A devastating power erupted from the monster's mouth, even blasting a huge hole in the mountaintop. Leon told Alfonso he could no longer intervene, as this was beyond a normal person's capability. Leon then transformed into the Golden Knight and charged at the monster. However, the monster's attacks prevented Leon from getting close and even pinned him against a wall. Alfonso tried to help but was knocked away by the monster with a single blow. Just as all seemed lost, Raphael appeared. He reminded Alfonso not to forsake the knight's honor and transformed into the Stronghold Knight, rushing towards the monster. He skillfully dodged the monster's attacks and landed a critical strike to save Leon. But Raphael no longer had the strength to continue fighting. He was impaled by the monster and, in his final moments, reverted to his human form and threw his knightly sword at Alfonso's feet, asking him to carry on his will. Initially hesitant, Alfonso didn't want his master's death to be in vain. He transformed into a knight and charged forward. With a final blow, he struck the core of Chirame, completely destroying the monster. In doing so, he lost his most respected master. From that day on, Alfonso would continue to fight, inheriting the honor of the Stronghold Knight. You would never guess why Mendoza harbors such deep hatred for the Makai Knights and sorcerers. It turns out, he was once a disciple of the Golden Knight, gifted with extraordinary talents. However, he did not use his abilities for good, instead experimenting on humans to enhance the power of his artifacts. This led to his expulsion from the Order. His master also left him with a curse that would never fade, ensuring he could never gain the respect of ordinary people as a Motto Ring sorcerer again. This curse would persist through generations. After being cast out, Mendoza used his cunning to gain favor with the royal family. He then manipulated horrors to help the Empire win wars, earning the trust of the Emperor, who even arranged a marriage for him. He thought his life was improving, but when his son was born bearing the curse, it reminded him of his master's words, making him feel as though his master wanted to end his lineage. Mendoza directed his hatred towards all Makai Knights and sorcerers, and initiated a series of witch hunts. Upon discovering that the queen was a descendant of the Golden Knight, he targeted the royal family as well, causing countless tragedies. Mendoza knew that Alfonso, having inherited the Stronghold Knight, would definitely seek revenge with the Garo team. He had Bernardo prepare for their arrival. Meanwhile, Alfonso was indeed planning to infiltrate the palace. Knowing about a secret passage within and with everyone's support, he led Garo and his father into the palace's underground. Below the palace was the royal tomb, where Mendoza had long been conducting his horrific experiments. The ceiling of the tomb was covered with numerous eggs, each containing a horror's monster. Their arrival awakened these creatures. Herman struggled to fend them off, but fortunately, Alfonso found an exit. They managed to lock the horrors inside, but upon emerging from underground, Bernardo was already waiting for them. Herman told Alfonso and Leon to go ahead while he dealt with Bernardo. Indeed, Bernardo let the two leave, focusing solely on Herman. He even killed his own men when they tried to help, and the two began a melee. Overwhelmed by darkness, Bernardo was no match for Herman, so he transformed, signaling he was serious about fighting. However, Herman remained human and sat down, curious about what Bernardo had gone through after he left. Recalling the past, Bernardo was nearly killed by soldiers and tried to reason with them, but they wouldn't listen. Unwilling to surrender, he resisted and initially wanted to eliminate them. But recalling Anna's words, his kindness overcame his hatred. Still, the soldiers wouldn't spare him. Desperate, he ultimately abandoned his principles and struck down the soldiers. Seeing ordinary people killed as witches, his beliefs shattered. He questioned why he should protect such people. At that moment, Mendoza appeared, healed Bernardo's wounds, and successfully recruited him into his alliance. Hearing this story, Herman became furious, unsure how to face Bernardo now, realizing his own actions had led to Bernardo's current state. Yet Bernardo's fall compelled him to confront him. This was the ultimate battle between Makai Knights, Shadow-Cutting Knight versus Dark Knight. Originally close friends, they now fought to the death, but out of respect, both gave their all. When regular moves failed, Dark Knight merged with his steed to launch a powerful attack. Shadow-Cutting Knight countered with his Tornado Dragon Slash. The clash engulfed them both, forcing them out of their knight forms. Herman expressed his desire to stop fighting, but Bernardo mocked him as a pitiful man. They continued to fight hand to hand. Herman managed to capture him, but was unexpectedly stabbed by a weapon hidden in Bernardo's prosthetic limb. Herman retaliated with a boomerang, hitting Bernardo. As life and death blurred, Bernardo seemed to regain his conscience, suddenly caring about Herman and asking about Anna. Herman lied kindly to him. In the end, Bernardo asked his old friend to help find a successor. Before Herman could respond, Bernardo turned to ashes. On the other side, Leon and Alfonso had found the arch-villain Mendoza. Eager to defeat him, Leon couldn't break the barrier Mendoza had created. Mendoza then showed them a new magical device he had made, planning to summon the most powerful horror monster from a magic mirror. Suddenly, two giant hands emerged from the mirror. Mendoza declared that this horror, along with the Millennium Red Moon, would completely destroy the country. To stop him, both transformed into their Makai Knights forms. Leon broke the barrier and charged at Mendoza, while Alfonso grappled with the horror. Mendoza attempted a verbal assault to break Leon's resolve. Angered, Leon began to lose his sanity and was immobilized by Mendoza. With a light touch on Leon's head, Mendoza made him recall his mother's death and manipulated his memories. Unable to cope, the curse within Leon erupted, turning him into a berserk Garo. He unleashed endless rage, even altering his armored form, and escaped through a large hole in the ceiling. His body, like a cannon, continuously shot flames, rapidly turning the entire citadel into a boundless inferno. Seeing his people suffer, Alfonso couldn't accept it. Garo, once considered the guardian deity of the nation, was now destroying it. He believed Leon was unworthy of using Garo. Herman arrived and told Alfonso that destroying the emblem on Leon's armor would suffice. Watching his out-of-control son, Herman was filled with regret. Leon continued to lose control. Alfonso transformed again and charged into the flames, but was no match for the berserk Garo and was flung aside by Leon. Just as Leon was about to destroy the city, Emma arrived in time. She temporarily restrained Leon with ice threads, but he quickly melted the ice. Alfonso seized the moment to attack, skillfully hitting the emblem on Leon's waist. Using a knight's kick, Alfonso sent Leon flying to the moon, which reverted him from his berserk state. As Leon fell and was about to crash, Emma used her threads to cut down a tower, lessening the impact of the fall, allowing Herman to catch his son. Realizing his son was alive, he knew Alfonso had held back. Meanwhile, Mendoza had completed his real experiment. To combat the monster, Alfonso picked up Leon's sword and transformed into the Golden Knight. As a blood relative, he too could become Garo. Alfonso charged at the monster, using his shield to block its attacks, but was caught by its tail and nearly dragged into the demon realm. Just when it seemed Alfonso wouldn't return, he forcefully opened a portal back from the demon realm. Now, only Alfonso and Mendoza were left to confront each other in an unresolved feud. As they charged at each other, the monster suddenly emerged and devoured Mendoza. Alfonso then swiftly killed the powerful horror monster with a single strike. This battle proved to everyone that Alfonso was the rightful heir to become Garo. A terrified man was devoured by the gruesome horrors monster. At that moment, a burly man on a motorcycle sped to the scene and swiftly knocked the monster over. He then pierced it with his sword. Soon after, this muscular hero dragged the creature across the ground. Confronting the uncontrollable horrors, a man named Wilhelm summoned his powers. Space shattered, and golden armor enveloped his body. Hidden in the shadows, he is the Golden Guardian who cleaves through all darkness. Known as the strongest Makai Knight, Garo. His sharp sword tore through everything before him. The monster, a terror in the dark slaughtering humans, was utterly defenseless. Finally, a fierce sword strike utterly destroyed it. Surrounded by blazing flames, the Golden Knight Garo stood like a warrior god of fire. 2 days ago, a man grabbed Sophie, a girl on the verge of falling, but his head twisted 180 degrees. He was a horrors monster born from darkness. The horrors chased Sophie until Wilhelm knocked him down with a punch, aiming to end the creature. However, the starved and enraged horrors fought back. Wilhelm continuously punched the horrors in the face until it fell silent on the ground. But it was just a ruse by the cunning horrors. When Wilhelm was off guard, it pounced on Sophie and fled with her. Wilhelm chased them down and intercepted the horrors again. To save itself, the horrors threw Sophie off a high building. Kind-hearted Wilhelm chose to save her, allowing the horrors to escape. Later, Wilhelm explained to Sophie that horrors exploit the negative emotions hidden within humans to invade and possess, preying on humans at night. Sophie revealed that she had sought a moonlight sorcerer for divination to find her missing brother Martin, not knowing he was a monster. Wilhelm asked Sophie to help lure the monster out, and his motto ring Zaruba also persuaded her. She agreed. That dark night, the sinister horrors appeared again, chasing Sophie. Wilhelm ambushed and threw the horrors aside. After injuring it, Wilhelm demanded the location of El Dorado, the Golden Country, which was also the clue left by Sophie's brother. The horrors mocked Wilhelm's foolish dreams. Then it transformed into its terrifying true form as red lights glowed. Wilhelm summoned the Motto motorcycle and took Sophie to dodge the relentless pursuit. Despite the horror's persistence, Wilhelm's superb driving skills eventually shook it off, and he took Sophie to safety before setting out to destroy the monster. Wilhelm, in his powerful Garo form, ultimately reduced the horrors to ashes. This horrors monster, who went out for a night run to exercise and snack, was being chased by the Golden Knight. Despite its fast speed, it was caught and severely beaten by the Golden Knight. This monster was once a rising star on the athletic track, having won numerous accolades. However, a career-ending injury on the track left it unable to run, leading it to despise its fate. It questioned why fate allowed others to keep their legs while it lost its own, which were crucial to its achievements. Overwhelmed with emotion, the man fell to the ground, where a sinister voice spoke to him. Sensing his hatred, the devil tempted him, promising that giving in to possession would fulfill his desire to run again. The man agreed, and the horrors from the demonic realm entered his body, letting him run wildly on his legs, now controlled by the horrors. It was snack time for the horrors. Meanwhile, Makai alchemist Luke spotted the creature from a high-rise building. He had never seen a horrors move so swiftly, making him wonder if it had 18 legs. He lost the signal, and thus the trail. The next day, Luke met Wilhelm at a restaurant operated by the watchdogs. Wilhelm, seeing the plump waitress, continued his habit of praying in gratitude. The mission assigned by the watchdogs was to hunt down the horrors seen the previous night. Wilhelm had also been tracking it but lost it. The watchdogs, a group of powerful Makai priests, do not interfere directly in human affairs, but delegate the task of eliminating horrors that escape from the demonic realm to Makai Knights. Luke and Wilhelm went to the district where the horrors monster had disappeared to investigate. However, Luke found no clues. A distressed woman was searching for her missing husband, who, she revealed, had been a sprint champion and was disabled due to an accident, but had vanished the previous night. Wilhelm and Luke immediately suspected a connection between her husband and the horrors monster. Luke instructed Wilhelm that if he spotted the horrors, he should drive it towards the slums where Luke had set up a trap to deal with it. After this, the aloof Luke left. A tired woman returned home where a man approached her. It was her missing husband. To her shock, he was standing up and complained of being very hungry, then attempted to eat her. The horrors monster lunged at its human wife, but Wilhelm, who had anticipated this, appeared and saved her. Sensing something amiss, the monster fled, starting a dizzying chase. Transformed into Garo, Wilhelm rode his Mado motorcycle and executed a sharp drift to block the horror's path, herding it towards the arena Luke had prepared. The foolish monster's movements were completely visible to Luke from a high-rise building. Luke, armed with his Makai guns, took aim and fired a demon-eliminating bullet at the horrors. Just then, a bystander appeared. To avoid harming the innocent, Luke had to hold back his lethal shot and change the battle site. He reloaded his sniper rifle and shot from 180 kilometers away, aiming to finish off the horrors. But at the last moment, Wilhelm took the kill. The detached Luke, unbothered by the outcome, coolly exited the scene. Wilhelm comforted the woman who had lost her husband. Luke cast a spell that erased the woman's memory of the incident. The next day, the woman, with no memory of these events, continued to search the streets for her lost husband. This delicate and beautiful woman has a unique, unknown hobby. Not only can she crawl on walls like a spider, but she also enjoys eating raw meat. Isn't she interesting? Meanwhile, a girl named Sophie is on her way to meet this woman in search of clues about the legendary city of El Dorado. She has been asking about the whereabouts of the knight Wilhelm in armor forums. She then learns from a roommate at the orphanage about a recent paranormal event involving a priest who used to visit them and has mysteriously disappeared. Ever since, faint moans can be heard at night from the church. Sophie thinks Wilhelm might appear there. After asking around, Sophie finally arrives at the church and meets the beautiful long-haired woman introduced earlier, who is Mary, the priest's sister. Kind-hearted Mary invites Sophie inside. She tells Sophie that she has been seeking help from local police since her brother's disappearance, but to no avail. Sophie empathizes deeply, as she has also been searching for her own brother without giving up. The two women feel a closer bond. Sophie curiously observes the withered flowers scattered around the house. Mary explains that keeping them has been a long-time hobby of hers. Suddenly, the doorbell rings. Opening the door, they are surprised to find Wilhelm holding fresh flowers. Wilhelm is equally surprised to see Sophie there. He then reveals his purpose. He came to visit the beautiful Miss Mary. He comforts Mary, who has lost her brother, and wishes he could move in immediately to take care of her. Sophie watches this scene speechlessly. The gentle Mary blushes, reminiscent of a time when a handsome young man once expressed his love for her in her youth, making her feel so happy. It seems as if she hears her brother's voice behind her, interrupting her memories, as the flowers fall to the ground. Sophie followed Wilhelm as he turned to leave and stepped outside, hoping to learn more about the Golden Country. Wilhelm tricked her into looking away, then sped off on his motorcycle, advising Sophie to return home before sunset. Sophie didn't take his words seriously, and as night fell, she returned to the church. Mary was delighted to warmly welcome Sophie back, and the atmosphere was cozy and congenial. Sophie asked Mary if her brother was as gentle as hers. Mary paused and said, "He loved me more than anyone else and often told me how pretty I was. Though his words were gentle, they now seemed eerie. It turned out that Mary's brother was a perverse sibling controller with an intense possessiveness over her, not allowing any man near her. Once a naive and romantic Mary lived under the violent shadow of her brother, leading her to see the world in shades of despairing black and tragic red. Abused by her brother, Mary felt the world mourning for her as she wilted like a delicate flower. With bloodshot eyes, Mary slowly approached Sophie, who was terrified and ran away, finding herself in a basement where Mary had once been tortured. The room was filled with bloody torture instruments and scattered long hair, testifying to Mary's suffering. More horrifying was a decayed male head buried among fresh flowers, identified as the priest's. Suddenly, noises came from above as Mary broke through the ceiling. Sophie watched in horror as Mary gnawed on the priest's head, then transformed like eating a magical red mushroom into Super Mario. Mary had become a horror's monster. At a critical moment, the reliable Wilhelm swooped in on his motorcycle from the sky. Facing the charging horror's monster, he swiftly grabbed it and told Sophie to leave quickly before dragging the monster outside for a hand-to-hand fight. Sophie, feeling helpless but wanting to assist, tried to move the church's large bell to create trouble for the monster. The monster quickly dodged, but her action caught its attention. Wilhelm then transformed into the Golden Knight and decisively defeated the horror's monster with a single strike. Meanwhile, Sophie was hit by a dislodged bell clapper and fell from the building. But fortunately, a motorcycle controlled by Zaruba saved her in time. Sophie pleaded with Wilhelm to help her search for clues to the Golden Country. Looking at the pitiful Sophie, Wilhelm was reminded of his deceased sister and couldn't help but agree. Together, they embarked on a demon-hunting journey. The overweight woman took off her silk nightgown, leaving the man to endure the humiliation and pain with tears. Suddenly, the woman stopped and got out of bed, allowing the man to breathe a sigh of relief, having narrowly escaped. Initially, the woman was an obscure 18-line actress, but she quickly rose to become an international superstar. All actors who opposed her suffered sudden accidents. After reaching the top, she retired bravely and married a wealthy businessman who mysteriously died soon after. Rumors said the woman possessed a ring that could control powerful horrors monsters, attracting the attention of the horrors monster hunting organization, Watchdogs. To investigate undercover, Gina and Wilhelm posed as a married couple, and at Sophie's insistence, she also joined the mission. After becoming a wealthy widow, the woman was known far and wide as an expert in handling troublesome children. Any child sent to her was transformed into an obedient one. Wilhelm and Gina sought the woman's help with the mischievous Sophie. Inside the mansion, eerie black cats were everywhere. The woman told Wilhelm that in a few days, she would train a daughter as docile as a cat. Meanwhile, Gina took Sophie and left on a pretext to investigate, leaving Wilhelm to deal with the woman. Captivated by Wilhelm's robust appearance, the woman was overtaken by lust. To buy time, Wilhelm had to sacrifice himself tearfully. Elsewhere, Gina and Sophie sneaked around, and at an unusual wall, Gina used Makai alchemist magic to break a barrier, leading them into a dark underground area. There, they found diaries hidden by children previously sent to the woman. It turned out that the woman was using the power of horrors monsters to extract the children's souls and transfer them into black cats. Deep underground, they found a crimson summoning circle used for calling demons. Gina guessed this circle was a medium for horrors monsters to enter the real world. Just then, the overweight woman appeared. She had sensed Gina's entry into the basement and prepared to eliminate her, inadvertently freeing the distressed Wilhelm. The woman summoned the castle's black cats, which transformed into dark tentacles attacking Gina. However, Gina's magical potion easily destroyed them. Seeing the damaged Maddo ring, Gina realized that the woman did not have the power to control horrors monsters. Originally, when she summoned the horrors monsters using counterfeit Maddo rings, she was overpowered and consumed by them, becoming a horrors monster herself. Only when Gina exposed everything did the woman realize she had long been dead. Losing control, she reverted to her true horrors monster form, intending to devour them. However, Gina's Maddo ring magic protected them from the dark power. Wilhelm arrived just in time and fatally struck the horrors monster from behind, marking a successful completion of their first demon hunting mission together. This captivating woman drew the attention of all the men present, and she was none other than Makai alchemist Gina. Mob boss Arthur could not resist approaching her. Gina played along, and after their close interaction, she obtained Arthur's DNA authentication information. Investigator Gina's infiltration plan was already halfway to success, but she faced a man-eating computer next. Arthur, originally a mediocre, lecherous thug, rose within a month to be the biggest emerging mob boss in the region. Gina suspected that this abnormal rise was due to the influence of horrors monsters. Earlier, Gina had stormed the gang's building alone, beating fully armed guards until they were swollen and dazed, unable to do anything but watch her continue. At the last laser-filled barrier, Gina easily flipped over, but Arthur caught her at the last moment. After escaping, Gina decided to seek Willem's help. Willem, grateful to the heavens for his robust physique, was sent flying by Gina's forceful greeting. Unable to resist admiring Gina's fiery figure, Willem was about to pray in thanks, but was attacked by Gina's pet beast because he had entered its territory. Gina informed Willem that their mission to hunt horrors monsters targeted the suddenly powerful Arthur. At the top floor of their headquarters, there was a heavily guarded room, likely hiding the horrors monster. To gather information about the Golden Country from the horrors monster, Wilhelm agreed to help Gina. Meanwhile, various powerful figures convened to plot a joint effort to eliminate Arthur, who now threatened them. As they were making plans, gunfire erupted. All the guards outside had been eliminated, and then 2 gunmen with Gatling guns began firing, suppressing them with overwhelming firepower. Arthur had already received intelligence and directly eliminated all rival gangs with his men, capturing the sole survivor and bringing him back to headquarters. Upon waking up, this man found himself facing a bizarre computer that was actually alive and trying to devour him alive. Arthur's newly recruited subordinate, witnessing this horrifying scene, was almost scared to death. Arthur proudly explained that it was with the continuous intelligence provided by this computer that he was able to rise from a thug to a boss. However, there was a cost: feeding the computer a living person every day. To infiltrate the final room, Gina and Wilhelm split up. Gina, having gained access with Arthur's DNA authentication, was pursued by a man who noticed something off but was unaware of her capabilities. After Gina defeated him, she confirmed the presence of a horrors monster. Meanwhile, Wilhelm successfully infiltrated and Gina disabled the defense system. In just 60 seconds, the forceful Wilhelm dismantled a large iron door with his bare hands and entered the eerie room. Arthur, sensing something amiss, surrounded Gina with his men. Gina, playing the victim, claimed she was forced by the muscular Wilhelm and had no choice. The man, recently beaten by Gina, was nearly questioning his life choices. Arthur watched Wilhelm approach the computer without panic, thinking the robust man would be an extra meal for the computer. As Arthur and his thugs prepared to enjoy the show, they were nearly shocked, speechless. The computer creature they feared was about to sneak attack, but was grabbed by Wilhelm, who seized its electric tentacles. Wilhelm, picking up a Garoken, quickly handled everything and even punched the computer creature to destruction. However, this was not its true form. The enraged computer creature prepared to devour all the living people in the building. Its twisted, crawling electric tentacles lunged at the thugs. Gina dropped her disguise and fired a defensive magic bullet, temporarily halting the rampaging tentacles. The thugs fled in terror. Arthur, unwilling to lose everything, pointed his gun at Gina, having lost his sanity. At the last moment, a man with a newly found conscience switched sides and knocked Arthur down. At this point, the electric tentacles began to spread toward them. The grotesque full form of the computer creature finally appeared, and Wilhelm transformed into his golden Garo form. Above them, Wilhelm swiftly cut through all the tentacle attacks of the computer creature. After an intense battle, Wilhelm knocked the creature to the ground. Then, descending from the sky, his raging aerial slash pierced through the body of the computer creature. With a thunderous explosion, the horrors monster was destroyed, and Gina and the man were saved. As Gina prepared to leave, the man questioned her, asking why she would save someone like Arthur. Gina responded with a fiery red-lipped kiss, leaving the man in shock. Arthur, however, could not escape his fate, and was shot by a former enemy after losing his power. Have you ever heard of a movie theater that likes to eat couples? This horrors monster, transformed from a single person, secretly drags girls inside itself and uses its big eyes to create illusions. Then, It swallows them whole. Boys left behind in the movie theater become single. The horror's monster hunting organization, Watchdogs, issues orders to Luke and Wilhelm to investigate the strange disappearances occurring frequently at the cinema. The aloof Luke mocks Wilhelm, saying he's now just a babysitter and probably too busy to handle this case. Wilhelm, frustrated by Sophie making faces, says nothing. Luke goes to the cinema alone and tricks the ticket seller into giving him a ticket using his madog. Everything seems normal until the movie ends, and it appears the horror's monster might not exist. Sophie, eager to help, learns from an all-knowing forum that the previous disappearances all occurred in cinema seat L13. Luke visits the cinema again and luckily sits directly in seat L13. An unusual event occurs. The movie screen shows scenes of a young Luke practicing sword fighting with his father, a formidable Silver Knight who had strict expectations, hoping Luke would inherit the title of Silver Knight. At this point, Luke is trapped in the horror's monster's illusion. Upon hearing of Luke's disappearance, Wilhelm rushes to the cinema. Madoga Zaruba senses the presence of the horror's monster. They finally find the entrance to the barrier. Wilhelm's sharp Garokin pierces through the seat, and surprisingly, crimson horror's monster flesh spurts out. Wilhelm then enters the body of the cinema horror's monster. Watching Luke trapped in the illusion, Wilhelm loudly reminds him, "Didn't your mother die right before your eyes?" Luke snaps awake and the illusion vanishes. Then, a huge black horror's monster appears before him. Makai alchemist Luke quickly charges forward, firing his Makai guns wildly at the horror's monster. He then leaps up, dodging the monster's disgusting saliva attack, and lands on top of the monster's head. Under the enhancement of the Mado Ring magic circle, his magic bullets, now more powerful, fire continuously. With one fierce shot, the horror's monster's body explodes and dissipates. After Luke stylishly lands, facing the horror's monster's large eyes, he charges at it with his sword. Outside the illusion, Wilhelm, holding his Garokin, also stabs at the horror's monster's magic eye. Together they strike, destroying the monster that masqueraded as a movie theater and preyed on couples. The usually reserved Luke says he owes Wilhelm a favor. Wilhelm tells Luke to repay the favor to Sophie instead, as she was the one who found the crucial clue. From then on, Luke truly accepts Sophie. He is Chris, the Dark Knight who fell into the abyss of darkness. Once the mightiest Silver Knight, he lost himself in the pursuit of power and sacrificed his soul and body to darkness. This is the destined battle between darkness and light. The Golden Knight and the Dark Knight instantly burst forth at high speed. The heavy bulk glaive and the rapidly oscillating Garokin clashed violently, sending sparks flying through the air. Then, with a fierce blow, Dark Knight Chris sent Golden Knight Wilhelm flying, crashing through several reinforced concrete buildings. Following up to the rooftop, could this be the end for Wilhelm? Not long ago, a horror's monster named Pawn from the land of El Dorado infiltrated Russell City. He met a female office worker attracted by the allure of the Golden Country. As she inquired about El Dorado, Pawn reverted to his true monstrous form and devoured her. Meanwhile, a mysterious white-haired man appeared in the city, seeking information about Sophie. Wilhelm and Luke began investigating a series of disappearances. Sophie discovered a crucial clue. A 7-member online gaming team had recently vanished after declaring their intent to seek happiness in El Dorado. She informed Wilhelm and Luke, who then found the missing individuals unconscious in a store's basement. There, Wilhelm noticed a map on the wall marking Sophie's orphanage as a target. Elsewhere, a nun told the children at dinner about a kind stranger offering a free trip to El Dorado. Sophie felt uneasy, and shortly after, the doorbell rang. The kind stranger, who was actually the horror's monster Pawn, arrived early at the orphanage. Due to Wilhelm disrupting their plans, Pawn prepared to forcibly take the children. Following the nun's instructions, Sophie led the children away from the orphanage and called Wilhelm for help. The nun faced the monstrous Pawn, refusing to step back as she protected her children. However, she was overpowered and severely wounded. Upon Sophie's return, the true form of Pawn couldn't suppress his bloodlust. Just then, the white-haired man appeared, killing the horror's monster that almost murdered Sophie. Shockingly, he also killed the nun by stabbing her, revealing that he was sent by the King of El Dorado to bring Sophie back. Wilhelm and Luke arrived just in time. Seeing the white-haired man, Luke became extremely agitated and engaged him in a fierce battle on the streets. It turned out that this mysterious man was Chris, the once strongest Silver Knight and Luke's father, who had fallen to become a Dark Knight. Soon, Luke was overpowered and stabbed by Chris. Fortunately, Wilhelm intervened in time, saving Luke from being killed by his own father. Meanwhile, members of the Watchdogs organization set up a barrier around the Knights' battlefield to protect the city, and sent other members to help Sophie escape. As the two girls headed to the underground shelter, they encountered a large group of horrors monsters trying to capture Sophie. They used a magical talisman to safely escape the danger. Faced with a formidable opponent, both Chris and Wilhelm donned their Mato-Ring armor. The battle between the Dark Knight and the Golden Knight began, sending violent gusts that shattered all nearby building windows. Ultimately, after withstanding a powerful blow from the Dark Knight, Wilhelm, reminded of his tragic past where he lost his only sister, believed their power existed to protect others. Wilhelm chose to engage in hand-to-hand combat with the Dark Knight Chris, aiming to show him the futility of power without belief. The furious punches from the Golden Knight overwhelmed the Dark Knight. The enraged Golden Knight demonstrated his formidable strength, severely injuring the Dark Knight Chris, who fell to the ground. Wilhelm then disengaged his armor, his fists still glowing with golden energy, preparing to finish off Chris. Suddenly, a blast of white energy filled the air with dust and smoke, allowing Chris to escape. Countless horrors monsters chased a speeding car. A handsome man with a sniper rifle appeared, never missing a shot, killing one horror after another. He then leapt into action, facing the dense swarm of horrors directly, took the optimal firing stance, and unleashed a barrage of bullets from his dual guns. His powerful gunfire cleared all the horrors monsters, and he stylishly landed after killing the last one. The group of four, seeking revenge against their king, headed west toward El Dorado, the Golden Country. Along the way, they overcame various challenges, including a roadside store owner who bred horrors monsters and tried to harm two girls for their wealth. This time, however, the store owner was defeated by them. A giant water demon was annihilated by the perfect teamwork of Makai alchemist Gina and Golden Knight Wilhelm. Continuing west, Sophie was kidnapped by a humanoid horrors disguised as a public security officer. Wilhelm was mistakenly pursued by armed townsfolk as a kidnapper. Fortunately, with Gina's help, they caught up with the humanoid horrors, which revealed its true form. Remembering the numerous false accusations it had framed him with, Wilhelm destroyed it in seconds. However, finding the Golden Country was not easy. Bishop, one of the Golden Country's three swords, led an army of horrors against them. The horrors cast a shadow over the sky, and their war vehicles kicked up dust clouds filled with malice towards Wilhelm and his group. To protect Sophie, Wilhelm had Gina take her away from the battlefield. The strongest Golden Knight, Garo, decided to face the massive army alone. Wilhelm and Zaruba donned their golden armor and charged into the terrifying horde of horrors. Wilhelm gripped his Garo and effortlessly slashed through the massive bodies of the horrors. No matter how many horrors there were, under Wilhelm's sword, they turned from malicious and fierce to desperate and fearful. On the other side, Bishop personally led a flying squadron of horrors in pursuit of Sophie. Gina's years of driving skills helped her dodge the physical attacks of the horrors. She instructed Sophie to climb into the back seat, where there was a terrifying modified Gatling gun. Sophie took a deep breath, decisively pulled the trigger, and unleashed a torrent of terrifying steel magic towards the horrors in the sky, causing heavy losses. Luke also arrived in time, dealing with the remaining horrors. Forced to act personally, Bishop emerged from the ground, causing their car to lose control. Sophie was bound by several tentacles. Just as Bishop was about to take her away, Zaruba rushed out, rescued Sophie, and sped off with her to escape. This ancient motorcycle, after calming the frightened little girl, resolutely charged towards the pursuing Dark Knight. Amidst a loud explosion, golden fragments scattered, and the girl was heartbroken. Wilhelm gently cradled his severely injured old companion, Zaruba. The Dark Knight, only slightly injured, was already closing in. Wilhelm had no time to say goodbye before Zaruba faded away into streaks of light. "Let's fight with his strength then," Wilhelm resolved, his attire solemn. Blood-red lightning coursed as his golden armor shone. Golden Knight Garo Wilhelm pointed his sword at his enemy. Dark Knight Chris leaped in with a slash, his immense power shattering the ground. Blades clashed, and after a fierce battle, Wilhelm gained the upper hand with several quick moves. He then grasped Chris's head, but as the foremost warrior of the Golden Country, Chris would not be defeated so easily. After a scoff, Chris easily broke free. Suddenly, the king of the Golden Country summoned Chris. Wanting to continue the fight, Chris had no choice but to leave. Wilhelm, staring at his empty hands, remained silent. On the other side, the Golden Country Wilhelm had been seeking turned out to be a perfect realm yearned for by the common people. Here, everyone was equal and happy, an Eden where people enjoyed themselves. Melia, who had lived a hard life at the bottom, arrived in this Golden Country. At the invitation of a friendly stranger, she found herself at a wild dance party. The party host announced that the most popular game segment was starting. Under the spotlight, Melia and two other girls were chosen as the lucky stars of the day. Confused, Melia looked around at the excited crowd, not understanding until she heard screams from afar. Fear started to set in. At that moment, the creatures around her eyes glowed red. It turned out this was a realm of horrors monsters, and the Golden Country was their hunting ground for humans. Unaware humans were deceived by illusions, working for the horrors monsters, and ultimately, they might randomly become food for the horrors. The party venue was their dining hall. Faced with the horrors revealing their true forms, Melia ran for her life and grabbed a seemingly normal man for help. In ancient legend, there existed an evil dark Motto ring. Whoever possessed the Motto ring held terrifying power over demons. The ruler of the Golden Country harnessed the power of the Motto ring to control three powerful dark beings, known as the Golden Country's Three Swords: Dark Knight Chris, Dark Queen Quinn, and Shadow Walker Bishop. A brutal horrors monster, coveting the power of the Motto ring, infiltrated the Golden Country. Opening its mouth, it suddenly spat out an organ that devoured a man's face. After two men transformed into its clones, they were absorbed into its body. To defeat the ruler of the Golden Country and seize the Dark Motto ring, the monster charged into a gathering place of horrors in the Golden Country. Surrounded by horrors, they planned to completely tear apart this audacious intruder. Eventually, the man dragged the leading horrors to the headquarters of the Golden Country. He threw the treacherous horrors against a barrier, easily breaking through and entering the building. Confronting Dark Queen Quinn, the overconfident man boasted grandly and struck first, sending his clone hurtling towards the queen. The clone, with its remarkable regenerative abilities, was unfazed by the Queen's red petal attack. However, he was soon to learn what true terror and power were. With a wave of her hand, Quinn easily bound the man's clone with countless tendrils. A demonic man-eating plant emerged, baring its fangs as fear spread. Quinn declared their crimes. The dying man reverted to his true horror's form and lunged at the Dark Queen. His sharp claws were easily blocked by the Queen, who mocked the man's overestimation of himself, crushed his hand, and kicked him away. The demonic plant pounced, devouring his body. Everything came to an end. Meanwhile, Wilhelm and his group arrived in the Golden Country. Gina had returned to the Land of Guidance for another mission, and Sophie finally found her missing brother. Wilhelm and Luke discovered that the Golden Country was actually a realm of horror's monsters. They began searching for clues everywhere. Sophie connected to the network of the Golden Country. A mysterious person handed her an envelope containing information about the true nature of the Golden Country. Wilhelm went to the designated location and met the mysterious man, who turned out to be a staff member who developed the network for the Golden Country. Driven by curiosity, he had cracked an encrypted file and discovered that he was surrounded by monsters. He then received an anonymous message advising him to hide immediately and look for a golden knight named Wilhelm. He also revealed to Wilhelm that the so-called Golden Country was developed by a genius programmer who was Sophie's brother. Just then, the horrors police of the Golden Country discovered them. Wilhelm and Luke, along with the man, fought their way out. To uncover the whole truth, they entered the headquarters of the Golden Country. The Queen had been waiting for a long time. Numerous demonic man-eating plants attacked them, but Wilhelm and Luke dispatched each one. The Queen herself easily blocked the combined attack of Wilhelm and Luke. At that moment, a monster kidnapped Sophie. Shadow Walker Bishop dragged Sophie and threw her into the sea of consciousness of the Golden Country. Wilhelm jumped in to rescue her, and their souls entered the real Golden Country. When Wilhelm awoke, he was surprised to see his sister, who had long been dead, while Sophie finally met her long-sought brother. Pedestrians on the street strangely kept twisting their heads, and then horrors monsters emerged from within them. These human-faced spider monsters began searching for intruders under the commands of the Golden Country system. They soon discovered Wilhelm, but he violently hurled them away. Facing the attacking human-faced spider monsters, Wilhelm knocked them all out with just his fists. However, more horrors monsters soon arrived. Fortunately, Wilhelm's sister had partial access to the Golden Country system and successfully deceived these monsters. 10 years ago, an ancient horrors monster infiltrated the Seagram Technology Company, stole research on virtual human brain space technology, and laid the groundwork for the Golden Country network. A Makai Knight who arrived to stop it defeated the ancient horrors monster's physical form. The explosive battle that ensued affected Wilhelm's sister. At that time, her soul was captured by the Golden Country, but due to her Golden Knight lineage, she retained full self-awareness. Meanwhile, Sophie finally met her long-missed brother, Martin. She was shocked to see that he possessed the Mado Ring, which could control horrors monsters, and he was actually the king of the Golden Country. Sophie desperately tried to pull the Mado Ring off her brother's finger, telling him that he had taken many innocent lives. Martin refused to believe Sophie, showed her the greatness of the Golden Country, and told her that soon, the Golden Country network would connect to the entire world, and all humanity would move there. What Martin did not know was that this so-called relocation meant the death of humanity, a plot by the horrors monsters to farm humans. Just then, Wilhelm's sister found Sophie. They had come to rescue her. The Dark Queen appeared again, blocking Wilhelm with numerous tentacles. In his soul state, Wilhelm could not transform in the Golden Country and was ultimately restrained. His sister used her access to send Wilhelm back to reality. Beside them, Sophie, heartbroken, watched the horrors monster on her brother's shadow. She decisively embraced her brother and jumped into the abyss. The siblings awoke in reality, in a place littered with human remains. Seeing everything around him, Martin seemed to hear the cries of thousands of the dead. and he collapsed emotionally, choosing to flee. Martin, once so steadfast, was now shattered inside. The once pure-hearted Martin was finally corrupted by the horror's monster within the Mado ring. Even faced with his sister Sophie's calls, he could not wake up again. Martin extended his hand wearing the Mado ring. Dark red blood of the horror's monster spurted out. The ancient horror's monster appeared and swallowed Martin in one bite. The true king of the Golden Country, the ancient king of the horror's monsters, was resurrected. The man riding the flame motorcycle broke through the realm of void at full throttle. Then, Garo activated its blazing flame mode, with flames rising and the crimson gold greatsword shining bright. The Golden Knight Garo gripped the greatsword and slashed down at the king of the horror's monsters. This ancient horror's monster was cleaved in two, its soul completely extinguished. To save humanity on the brink of peril, Wilhelm chose to confront the terrifying king of the horror's monsters. He rode the revived Zaruba, alongside Sophie, who had administrative access to the Golden Country system, and re-entered the Golden Country. As horror's monsters swarmed, Wilhelm stayed behind to hold them off. Sophie headed to the core of the Golden Country to shut down the system. The king of the horror's monsters took Wilhelm by surprise, swallowing him into the realm of void. This black and white world is the absolute domain of the ancient horror's monsters. The Golden Knight Garo was gradually eroded by the void, losing his color. On the other side, all three swords of the Golden Country were deployed. The Dark Queen battled Makai alchemist Gina. In the fierce fight, the Queen revealed her true dark form and overpowered Gina. Luke was also at a disadvantage in his fight against his father, the Dark Knight Chris. Their defeat seemed certain. However, Sophie, who always believed in Wilhelm, never gave up. Enduring great pain, she plunged her hands into the core of the Golden Country, calling out to Wilhelm. Finally, Wilhelm awoke. Because humanity, in any era, continues to fight against destruction. As guardians of humanity, they would never surrender but would cut through the darkness with their swords, even at the cost of their lives. Luke firmly raised his sword, aware that his opponent was unbeatable. After suffering severe damage again, he activated a preset magic circle. The tremendous energy caused a massive explosion, temporarily stopping the Dark Knight. Facing the Dark Queen's scorn, Gina stood up defiantly. With her magic pet's coordinated assistance, she made a sharp turn on her motorcycle and charged directly at the Queen. Then Gina picked up a modified Gatling gun and fired wildly at the approaching Dark Queen. Under the terrifying firepower, the Queen was severely wounded and knelt. Gina, with her transformed dual guns, blasted the Queen's head. Meanwhile, Wilhelm was fiercely battling in the realm of void. The surging power of Garo boiled within him, and he finally broke through the blockade. Slaying the king of the horror's monsters. With the demise of the horror's monster king, Sophie's brother Martin's soul was finally freed. He said his final goodbye to his sister Sophie. Overwhelmed with grief, Sophie entered the shutdown code for the Golden Country system, which was all for my sister. Humanity worldwide was finally saved. Freed from the control of the Mado ring, Chris finally let Luke go. He could now have a fair fight with Wilhelm. A fierce battle ensued, their sharp spears and blades clashing wildly. Impressed by such a formidable opponent, Wilhelm was full of praise. Caught up in the thrill, they discarded their weapons and resorted to hand-to-hand combat. The explosive punches were blood-pumping. Eventually, the ultimate showdown between light and dark occurred. In a flash of lightning, the golden greatsword pierced Chris's dark armor. Chris smiled contentedly as he faded into darkness,